For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNewsGlobal. I'm Surya Gangadharan. US-China rivalry in space is intensifying. Witness China's recent claims that satellites owned and operated by SpaceX belonging to Elon Musk nearly collided with the Tiangong space station. The Chinese say this happened sometime in July and October last year, and they are understandably concerned. So the Chinese have a lot of other grouses against the US space program. Take a look at them. They say the near collision by SpaceX was deliberately engineered. They say SpaceX is acting in collusion with the US military. In fact, many SpaceX satellites have been launched by the US military. The Chinese say the 1,900 communication satellites launched by SpaceX are far too many and frankly not required. And finally, China says the satellites are intended for other purposes. So let me introduce my guest for this evening, Chaitanya Giri. You met him before. He runs a consultancy in space, Dawon Advisory and Intelligence. Chaitanya, welcome. Glad to have you in the new year.
Wishing you a very happy new year, Surya.
Thank you, Chaitanya. Now, Chaitanya, our first question: do you believe the Chinese are right when they say that this near collision was deliberately engineered?
That's a difficult question to answer because, firstly, it has numerous answers. First, let us accept that in today's day and age, a close rendezvous of any space-based object by another space-based object is entirely possible. Such operations usually are not undertaken by commercial or civilian entities, but by the space arms of various space militaries. And many of such operations are considered clandestine. What has happened in the case of SpaceX is very much evident. It is public knowledge. The trajectories of such satellites are not only tracked by US-based space situational awareness companies and agencies, but also similar entities that are present world over. But the alleged near collision of SpaceX Starlink satellite with that of the China space station cannot be part of any clandestine project. But there is a slight, idiosyncrasy here. Today, the US by far has the largest fleet of satellites orbiting in the low Earth orbit, something that spans between 100 kilometers from the surface of the Earth to almost 2,000 kilometers from the surface. And most of these satellites of US origin are commercial in nature. They are either operating in a standalone manner or they are part of large mega constellations. Starlink is a communication mega constellation, and it is aiming to launch thousands and thousands of satellites to provide internet services to customers that are present here on Earth. Now, if there is an unsustainable push for satellites in this low Earth orbit, which the US, of course, is engaging in right now, it is going to lead to crowding of low Earth orbit. And most of this crowding is going to lead into various collision scenarios. And the most vulnerable to collisions are the space station. Not only the Chinese space station, but also the International Space Station, which is orbiting in the same zone. Now, if there is such an unsustainable insistence on pushing thousands and thousands of satellites, a collisional cascade is quite evident, quite possible. It is a known fact, and nothing is clandestine about it. But is the US only to be blamed, and is China squeaky clean on this? The answer is no, because at a time when it is accusing SpaceX of engaging in certain in these kind of collisional scenarios, there are companies of Chinese origin. There's one that I know of, Galaxy Space, which is also aiming to launch thousands and thousands of satellites for communication purposes, and it is a direct competitor to SpaceX. So this entire episode is a reminder to us here in India that militarization of space operations, be it commercial operations or civilian operations, is inevitable. and it is contingent upon us to make necessary amends in our approach, in our foresight of the Indian space program.
Mhm. So, Chaitanya, just tell me, the Chinese plans for space, are these in direct competition with what the US is doing?
Yeah, so what China did, along with this complaint that it made to the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, it also started accusing SpaceX of engaging in several US military contracts. Now, this was a very peculiar way of dealing with this situation. And there is a background to it. Now, here in India, we've been fooling ourselves by wrongly assuming that militaries of the superpowers are not benefactors of their national space program. So the American space program, which is largely run by NASA in the civilian sense, has been benefiting the Department of Defense and Pentagon in a large way. Similarly, the Russian space program has been benefiting the Russian forces. Uh, China is doing exactly the same. Now, we have lived with this wrong assumption for quite a long time, and by doing so, we have kept our national space program sloppily civilian, and we've used it only for our socio-economic good. Now, the one question that arises very often in my mind is that is national security not a socio-economic good? What kind of socio-economic progress are we going to make if we are unable to use our space program to secure our strategic interests? So, SpaceX indeed has benefited from its ties with DoD, and that has happened right since 2004 2005 when the company came to fore, when it was formed. So, in its early years, the Falcon 1 launch vehicle, which was one of its first flagship products, the Falcon 1 had acquired contracts from US Air Force. It had acquired contracts from US Strategic Command as well as DARPA. So, SpaceX's launch vehicles are also launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. Yeah. They get launched from Cape Canaveral's space station, Space Force Station, which is in Florida. And even today, when the US has established something known as the US Space Force, SpaceX is eyeing for contracts from the Space Force, and it is asking the Space Force to use its reusable launch vehicles. Now, this is all public knowledge. So, what is China trying to accuse here? So, by accusing SpaceX, what Beijing is trying to do is it is wanting to justify the close association between the Central Military Commission, the CMC, and the so-called private space companies in China. And what better target to pin darts on than SpaceX? Because accusing his company, Elon Musk's company, makes global news, and it moreover strengthens the narrative that China is eager to take on the US in outer space.
No, we were talking earlier, Chaitanya. You mentioned that the Chinese have been able to infiltrate key UN agencies, including those dealing with space. And they are positioning themselves to a point where they can even rival Elon Musk, possibly even replace his company. Is that what the game is?
Yeah, exactly. The game is to use United Nations agencies and bodies to a great extent. Not only in the space side, but China has been doing that comprehensively in other sectors, especially telecom. It has made great inroads into the International Telecom Union, ITU. Likewise, even in space, one finds that China has entered into a very peculiar arrangement with United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, where this UNOSA is attracting various research groups to come and join the China space station and carry out their own experiments in this Chinese space station. So, customers or clients or partners who would not readily go to the Chinese space station would now, get some recommendations or testimonials from United Nations, and these testimonials are used by China to attract newer talent and newer research groups to collaborate with. This is a part of China's game for gaining legitimacy. Now, the United Nations, since its formation, has been led by largely by the P5, the permanent five. So what China is trying to do is it is trying to play all the cards that the P5 have played in these years, and it is exactly playing the same game by raising a few vanity projects and using those vanity projects to engage in soft diplomacy and eventually use the same soft diplomacy and convert it into hard diplomacy. So when I give the example of China using the United Nations for attracting partners for its space station, that is soft diplomacy. And when China starts writing letters to United Nations complaining about SpaceX, now that is using United Nations through a hard diplomacy manner, where it is trying to coercively use its affiliation and association and partnership with United Nations to pin on targets which are its closest competitors.
So Indian myopia, this refusal to acknowledge that there is a mix of military and civilian in what's going on in space above. What do you attribute it to? Is it a problem with the Indian Space Research Organization? What is it?
Yeah, there is a problem here because, like I said, there has been this insistence that we will use our space program only for socio-economic good. And as I said, is not national security a socio-economic good? Without national security, you can't, or without securing your own strategic interest, there is no socio-economic good that is possible for your nation or your people. Now, this is something that is not getting into the minds of the space policymakers and the space gurus that are sitting in Bangalore and in Delhi. And we are, continuing to use the same old socialist era narrative that we've set for ourselves in the 1960s and 70s when the space program began. Things have changed, times have changed. Now, for instance, when you also asked me about how China is trying to outdo United States. Now, it is very simple. China is not trying to deploy anything, something outlandish. There is no placement of weapons that is currently being undertaken that will give China a leverage over the West. What it is trying to do is simply attract talent, which would otherwise have gone to the West. It is attracting talent to come to its shores. Like, for instance, in this whole scenario about collisional cascade and space debris, which is a direct concern of such collisions or collision scenarios, and which is the core moot point of the complaint. What China has done is China has co-opted the entire global astronomy community on its side. Like, for instance, many of these astronomers have been squeamishly complaining for quite some time that these satellites, which are part of large mega constellation, thousands and thousands of them, these satellites are interfering in their daytime and nighttime observations. Now, it is hampering their scientific observations, and it is also hampering many of the observations which are of great concern for the planet, because there are groups of astronomers that are keeping watch on potentially hazardous objects, potentially hazardous asteroids which may come and hit us. So many of these cohorts have been complaining, but the US, by giving SpaceX the necessary mileage, economic mileage, has completely put these concerns at bay. Now, who has come to the rescue of these astronomy communities? China. Because by taking on SpaceX, they have somehow advocated the same line which these astronomy communities have been taking for some time. I'll go one step ahead. You might have seen this very, very spectacular observatory which once resided in Costa Rica. The observatory's name was Arecibo. And Arecibo, very spectacular. It was present in this dense, lush evergreen forest, tropical forest. And you had this, spherical dish which lied there. That Arecibo for a very long time used to attract astronomers from all over the world. The National Science Foundation of the United States was running it, but as it started dilapidating, the US NSF did not put in any money, or it did not put in any efforts to revive that telescope. Who has raised the successor of this telescope? China. And China did that in one of its very backward areas, uh, uh, in a province called as Guiyang. So by raising this 500-meter telescope, which also is another spectacular technical wonder of humanity, China has attracted all those scientists that would otherwise have gone to Arecibo. They will now go to China. Likewise, China is also setting up new observatories in the Qinghai province, in the northwest of China. It is setting up new observatories in Chile, in Antarctica. Now, uh, this is called as being a talent magnet, where you are attracting all the greatest talent possible on the planet
Yeah.
by your side. We do not have anything like this in mind. We are not rearing our own talent judiciously. Reservations is something that is marring us in a big way. The scope of attracting any overseas talent is far off. So there is a lot to learn from these strategic maneuvers. And I think we
So,
should
yeah. So,
pay.
last question, Chaitanya. What are the 2, 3 steps that India should take to remedy this situation? What should India do?
What should India do? So what we've done is we have taken the first step, which was long due, is initiating the space reforms, and
Yeah.
the reforms now give the private sector an equal pedestal with the national space agencies in undertaking space projects. Uh, these private sector companies are now forming industry bodies. We have two industry bodies right now in the country. One is the Indian Space Association, ISPA, and the other is Space Federation of India, Space Fed India. These companies and startups will now ask for various incentives, tax holidays, tax remedies, so that they become as competitive as some of these Western and Chinese companies. If not equally, they'll still want to have a place in the global space economy and the vast economic possibilities and returns that are possible now by participating in the global space market. That is something to be done. But on the strategic front, we do not yet know how to maneuver, because for a very long time we have had an ISRO, which was a space agency, which was a space contractor, which was
Everything.
a regulator, all in one, all put in one.
Yeah.
Now, after the reforms, there were two new bodies created. One was the New Space India Limited, which is a body created to offer ISRO services to the private sector, Indian and non-Indian, as well as you have the Indian National Space Authorization Center in space, which has been created to provide the private sector all the necessary infrastructure that now resides within the ISRO premises. Then you have various policies. One is the National Geospatial Policy, which is dedicated to the remote sensing side of things. We'll in the coming days need a National Space Transportation Policy. So many of these policies are in the works, and that's why you find that there is currently a lull in the activities. We are
Absolutely.
not
Yeah.
seeing many space launches happening because ISRO and the entire Department of Space architecture is gearing itself for the big changes that are coming because of Industry 4.0.
So, on that note, Chaitanya, it seems that we realize that there is a problem and we are moving to correct it, although the pace of our work could certainly be improved upon for what you're telling me. Chaitanya, thank you very much for that insight. Great perspective, and hopefully, India has got its act together or is getting its act together, and we'll see an improvement very soon. Thank you very much. Glad to have you on our show.
Thank you.
And for those of you who have joined us on the show, thank you for your comments, observations, and questions. They're always welcome. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on social media, including Instagram. Thank you and good night.